Emily Carter was used to the fact that her strength was rarely noticed immediately. At 34, she held the position of senior analyst at a large consulting firm, not because anyone had given her a chance or believed in her in advance, but because she simply had no right to be weak. After her husband's death, she learned far too early a simple and cruel truth. If you are a single mother, the world is not interested in your exhaustion, your grief, or how hard it is every morning to get up and pretend that life continues. Emily had started at the lowest position, working evenings, nights, sometimes with a laptop on her lap while Lily fell asleep next to her, squeezing her hand with tiny fingers. She didn't know how to ask for leniency and never used pity because she knew that sympathy fades quickly, but respect remains. Her professional reputation was built on accuracy, responsibility, and the rare ability to see weak points where others only saw dry numbers. Colleagues knew if Emily said the calculations were correct, then they were. But almost no one knew the cost at which that perfection was achieved. Michael Reynolds, on the other hand, was a man whose strength was apparent at first sight. 45 years old, a flawless career, reputation as a strict, demanding manager who never raised his voice but could stop a conversation with a single glance. He believed in order, hierarchy, and professional distance because, in his view, they protected a person from chaos, both at work and in life. He was a committed bachelor, not because of a lack of opportunities, but because of conscious choice. His life was structured as carefully as corporate strategies. No impulsive decisions, no attachments capable of disturbing internal balance. He was used to being alone and considered it a sign of maturity, not loneliness. Their first meeting didn't happen when Emily first stepped into the company, but much later, at a general strategic meeting where department heads and key analysts were present. Emily sat near the end of the table, taking notes and barely raising her head while Michael confidently presented a forecast that looked logical, cohesive, and, at first glance, flawless. But only at first glance. She hesitated for a long time before raising her hand because she perfectly understood. Contradicting Michael Reynolds meant challenging not just the boss, but the established system. "Excuse me," she said calmly when all eyes turned to her. "There is an assumption in these calculations that could lead to serious losses in the second quarter." The room fell silent. Michael slowly lifted his gaze to her, attentive, cold, evaluating. He expected uncertainty, excuses, maybe embarrassment. But he saw calm and precision. Later, when he checked her calculations and realized she was right, something inside him shifted, almost imperceptibly but irreversibly. From that moment, he began to look at her differently. The business trip to Chicago was supposed to be a formality, short, predictable, work-focused. But the weather, canceled flights, and booking mistakes turned it into something entirely different. When the hotel receptionist apologized and said there was only one available room, Emily felt a panic rising inside her, mixed with fatigue and a strange, inappropriate embarrassment. She was about to refuse, look for another hotel, spend the night in the lobby, anything to preserve her usual distance, when Michael calmly said, "It's temporary. And right now, it's more important that you are not alone." This phrase didn't sound like an order or a compromise, but like a simple human decision. And that's why Emily agreed. In the room, lit with soft, almost intimate light, roles disappeared. There was no boss and no subordinate. There were two adults in a vulnerable situation where you couldn't hide behind professional masks. Emily had left Lily with her mother, the only person she could trust with her daughter, without endless instructions and anxious calls. Grandma knew all the little rituals, which story to read before bed, how long to stroke her hair if she couldn't sleep, and what words to say when Lily suddenly felt too lonely. And still, leaving, Emily felt as if she were leaving a part of herself in another room, closing the door behind her. The phone rang at the moment when she had almost convinced herself that everything was under control. Lily's name on the screen made her heart ache painfully, and the inner voice, the one that usually helped her hold on, suddenly went silent. Mommy. The voice was quiet, uneven, as if Lily was holding back tears. I feel sick. I want you to be here. Emily turned to the window because she knew, if she looked at Michael now, he would see everything: fear, guilt, helplessness, that very feeling she had carefully hidden from the world. But he already understood. Later, when the phone rang again, now in the hotel room, Lily's voice was quieter, calmer. Grandma sat next to her, stroking her back, but the girl still needed to hear her mother. And perhaps to make sure the world was still okay. Michael hesitated for a long time before approaching. He never spoke to children, not because he couldn't, but because he avoided anything that could touch him too deeply. But this time he came over almost unnoticed and sat nearby, so Emily could feel his presence but not pressure. Hi, Lily, he said quietly, leaning closer to the screen. His voice sounded different than at the office, softer, more careful, as if he was choosing the tone as meticulously as the words.
I'm Michael.
I'm here with your mom. A thoughtful little face appeared on the screen. Lily looked carefully, too carefully for her age, as if deciding something important. Are you strict? She asked after a short pause. Michael froze for a moment, then answered honestly. Sometimes. But I try to be fair. Lily frowned, then asked the most important, crucial question, without shyness, without roundabout words. Are you good? Emily held her breath. This question, simple and direct, somehow seemed harder than any adult conversation. Michael didn't joke or evade. I don't always know the right way, he said after a pause. But I never hurt those I care about. Lily looked at him again, as if checking whether she could trust those words, then unexpectedly smiled. Then stay with Mom, she said. She gets sad sometimes, too. After the call, Emily was silent for a long time, then whispered, She hardly lets anyone close. And when she said that, Michael realized that somehow he had entered a circle he hadn't intended to, but from which he no longer wanted to leave. When Emily suggested he come over and meet Lily in person, Michael agreed too quickly, and only then realized how nervous he was. He spent longer than usual choosing clothes, changing his shirt several times, mentally running through all the mistakes he could make. He wasn't afraid of refusal. He was afraid of not being liked by the child, who saw people too clearly, without adult excuses. At the door, he lingered a second longer than necessary, took a deep breath, and then rang the bell. Lily opened the door herself and immediately looked at him carefully, as if continuing that same conversation through the screen. You came, she said, not as a question, but as a statement. I promised, he replied. That day they had breakfast together, drew, walked in the park, fed ducks and laughed, easy, without tension, as if they had known each other longer than they actually had. Lily told him about school, her fears and dreams, and he listened in a way he hadn't listened to anyone for years, unhurried, without inner resistance. When Lily, falling asleep that evening, said, "I like that you don't leave right away," Michael realized that this simple weekend had become more important to him than many victories and decisions. Love didn't burst into their lives suddenly or loudly. It remained quietly, cautiously, almost imperceptibly, like the feeling of warmth after a long cold. And sometimes Emily thought that everything could have turned out differently, if not for that business trip, that storm, that hotel room, where by chance the roles disappeared and only people remained. And Michael knew one thing. That evening, when the little girl looked at him through the screen and asked if he was good, he wanted for the first time in years to be better. Not for status, not for career, but so that one day that word would come out not as a question, but as a statement. And perhaps this is how some stories end, so that others can begin. Quietly, truly.